War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 79, Warfare Under the Sea. A listener sent an interesting article about how China is trying to create a sensor net to monitor the oceans, a concept they call transparent ocean. China's investing heavily in unmanned underwater capabilities, both static as well as mobile, land-based, space-based, all means by which they can control the undersea environment. And this investment shows two things. One, our submarine capability justifiably scares the shit out of them. And two, replicating that capability is far harder than countering it in a classic asymmetric technology duel. It's not unlike China's broke. President Trump is clearly excited to continue trading trillions of dollars with them and funding a nation which, in the past decade, has been directly and indirectly responsible for the death of 2 million Americans using chemical and biological weapons. And lest you think this is hyperbole, China has quietly admitted as much and used the opium wars of the 19th century as their justification. If China wanted to buy its way to a traditional blue water submarine force, they could. But money is only part of the problem. Experienced crews and, harkening back to Mahan, the manufacturing and maintenance industrial base is even more important than the cash. More so than nuclear weapons or fighter jets, the submarine, and specifically the nuclear-powered submarine, is the ultimate manifestation of military-industrial might. At first, a little bit about submarine warfare in general. Submarines serve a couple primary functions in naval strategy: sea denial and anti-shipping. They can sink ships. That was their traditional and classic role. They can do what we talked about, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They can hang out near places that you ordinarily can't get to and listen very discreetly. Submarines are the ultimate stealth vehicle. They can protect and escort friendly forces. If you have a surface fleet, having a few submarines around to help you out is very useful. And then it can do strike and deterrence, both conventional and unconventional. The SSBNs, the ballistic missile submarines, are the central component of strategic nuclear deterrence because of their second strike capability. Although the platforms and weapons have evolved, the missions are pretty stable. The defining advantage, as noted, of submarines is stealth. Submerged vessels attempt to avoid detection by minimizing their physical and acoustic signatures. Some key technical and operational contributors to stealth include the hull and propulsor design, the machinery isolation, mounting engines, pumps, and generators to reduce vibration, operational procedures, how fast you go, how well disciplined your crew is, whether they wear sneakers, kind of literally, and then environmental exploitation. There are oceanographic features, thermal layers, currents, seabed topography, that can mask acoustic signatures. The ocean is a really complex medium where sound propagation varies with temperature, salinity, depth, and good commanders, knowledgeable commanders, exploit these variations to hide from the various sensors that are going to be looking for them. Because of these variabilities, that's why China is investing so heavily in having many different capabilities to try to detect in one area where another might not be so good. Now, the two things that they primarily use is you have passive sonar, which is really just listening. And then you have active sonar, where they emit pulses of acoustic energy and listen for something to bounce back, and that would indicate a submarine. If you've seen The Hunt for Red October and the famous one ping only Vasily. There's other tools that are used by those seeking to find submerged submarines. You have MADS, the magnetic anomaly detectors, which back in the old P3 Orion days was that long boom hanging off the tail end. You have sonar that can be dipped. You have towed arrays behind helicopters or other ships. And then you talked about the multi-sensor data fusing. Submarine crews favor passive detection to maintain stealth, while the ASW, anti-submarine warfare forces, are a little more active in how they find things and can use both passive and active methods. The principal offensive weapon of submarines is the torpedo, an underwater guided, or can be unguided, but I don't know how many of those are still left, munitions designed to detonate against or near an enemy hull. There's anti-surface missiles, cruise missiles, mines, and then, of course, the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Beyond kinetic effects, submarines can function as surveillance and targeting, area denial. If you know there's a submarine, don't go there. The crew of the General Belgrano would have done well to have remembered that little fact. And then it's, kind of a covert thing. One thing that somebody joked about, and it was a takeoff on a ditty from the late 19th century, was, whatever happens, we have got nuclear-powered submarines, and they have not. Just a little bit about submarines themselves. I've met a lot of former submariners, not submariners, and they have uniformly been impressive individuals. Intellectually, with some common sense mixed in, they're smart. They have generally speaking, a very good, wicked sense of humor, probably necessary for the conditions. And all of them have been just a touch weird, which I guess is a prerequisite. But if you ever meet someone and they have earned what's called the dolphins, the submarine badge has dolphins on it. Gold badge in the Navy indicates an officer, and silver indicates an enlisted. If you ever meet someone who's earned their dolphins, they're worth getting to know. They're not going to have very good stories because they keep their secrets well, but they're generally good people. Big fan of those who man our submarine force. So some other things with submarines, you got to watch out for the neutral shipping and merchant vessels. We had a submarine came up out of the ocean and hit a Japanese, if I remember, fishing boat. I think it's a big ocean, but can be surprisingly small at times. So on anti-submarine warfare, surface vessels, like I said, they use hull-mounted and towed sonars. Aircraft and helicopters, dipping sonar, sonobuoys, and of course the magnetic anomaly detector. Now unmanned systems are becoming more popular. I might have mentioned this earlier, but it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors when it comes to these things. Submarines kill ships, ships kill airplanes, and airplanes kill submarines. So you need a lot of different capabilities if you want to maintain control of the sea. Technological developments in propulsion, material sensors, weapons influence submarine doctrine, but they don't really alter the fundamental trade-offs. Nuclear propulsion increases endurance and speed, which enables persistent presence and faster redeployment. Really, the only way to have a blue water capable submarine force is to be nuclear. But they're a little louder. Some of the electric boats that use various forms of submerged using a snorkeling, there's different technologies to avoid nuclear. Nuclear is a little louder, but it gives you the endurance and speed. And strategically, submarines affect naval force posture by imposing uncertainty and risk on adversaries. Anytime you want to move something by ship, if you don't control underneath the sea, you are probably taking an unacceptable risk. And China, having some blue water aspirations, is trying to figure out how to counter America's very overwhelming submarine advantage, both by numbers and by experience. So currently, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who also coincidentally or not, are in the cool kid club of legally, if such a thing exists among so-called sovereign nations, possessing nuclear weapons, can manufacture nuclear-powered submarines. And North Korea and India, though I suspect North Korea's are simply Chinese-designed and built reactors and hulls assembled in Pyongyang, much like their nuclear weapon capability. I will state here, I believe that North Korea's nuclear weapon capability is simply Communist China's nuclear weapon test program, and I have zero evidence beyond experience in the manufacturing of such things and some common sense. All that being said, North Korea has stated it is building one. I don't know how much to believe it, but if it does launch one, it'll be Chinese in everything but name and markings. India has launched its 3rd nuclear-powered submarine, 16 years after it launched its first. The thought of serving on an Indian manned and manufactured submarine terrifies me on several levels, as a side note. By numbers, the U.S. has over 60 submarines, both ballistic missile, the SSBNs, and attack submarines, the SSNs. Russia has about half of that at 31. China has 12, Britain 10, France 9. So back to the basics of submarine. It takes 4 submarines to keep one at sea constantly between maintenance and transfer of weapons in the case of SSBNs. So in the example of France, they have 4 SSBNs and 5 attack submarines, most of which are quite modern. For Great Britain, it's roughly the same, 4 SSBNs and 6 attacks. Attacks can be a little more flexible in the 4-for-1 math. The U.S., in comparison, has 18 SSBNs, which admittedly messes up the math, but there were 24 originally planned. At these numbers, 4-to-1 can be a little more flexible.
The backbone of America's submarine fleet since the 1980s have been the 18 Ohio class and the Los Angeles class attack submarines. The latter are being rapidly replaced by the Virginia class, of which 24 have already launched, with 66 being planned. It pains me to admit any procurement program in the War Department can be successful, but by most measurements, the Virginia class is a success. This success rests on two realities. First, two different shipyards are building them, so if one starts to fail, the other will steal their work. And the second is there was an intermediary class, the Seawolf class of submarines built in the late 90s, which, by most measurements, was a failure. Despite massive costs, they only delivered 3 submarines, but its ultimate success was maintaining an experienced workforce. The U.S. military-industrial complex was built on a fundamental assumption of an unending stream of unlimited money flowing constantly out of D.C., allowing for incessant replacing of older variants, and with several competing manufacturers all scrambling to provide the best, if not necessarily the most affordable, options to a Pentagon with little competition for funding. In 1962, the defense budget was nearly $500 billion. This is in 2009 dollars, with an overall budget of $850 billion. In 2019, the defense budget was about $500 billion out of an overall budget of $4 trillion. In case you were curious, the entitlement budget went from $200 billion in 1962 to $2.5 trillion in 2019. So what this meant is that you had massive workforces working in massive yards, cranking out massive quantities of hardware, with the explicit assumption that every decade it would all be replaced. And all that changed when the Berlin Wall fell. First, with the advent of the all-volunteer force replacing our drafty military, personnel costs have skyrocketed to over 25% of the overall defense budget. This is compared to single digits prior to 1973. Much of the military budget is fixed, so this money came almost directly out of the procurement budget. Second, we stopped replacing everything every decade. A great example is the B-52. It was slated to be replaced by the B-70, the B-1, the B-2, and now the B-21, none of which will replace them. It was actually replaced by the Minuteman missile, but that's a discussion for another time. It was fashionable to mock the Russians who, post-Cold War, would exhibit a magnificent new capability of which they would procure a handful and then move on to the next best thing. But there was certainly a method to their madness. At least they maintained the ability to design, test, build, and field new weapons to replace the old, even if they ultimately didn't. A pilot light of industrial capability, if you will. Harkening back to our discussion on the Virginia-class's success being a product of the seeming failure of the Seawolf. Which brings us back to the Ohio-class submarines, still prowling the deep oceans, and their projected replacement, the Columbia-class. For the success of the Virginia-class, it appears from the outside that Columbia is an absolute disaster in the making. It suffers from two key things compared to the Virginia-class. First, only one shipyard is building them, Electric Boats out of Connecticut. There is no competition, and therefore no apparent alternative for the Navy. And, most distressingly, nobody at Electric Boats out of Connecticut has ever built an SSBN. We have lost our incredibly hard-earned and, it appears, irreplaceable knowledge base on how to build a submarine that can launch a ballistic missile. So what does this mean? As mentioned earlier in the nuclear deterrence episode, the second strike capability is the heart of deterrence, and the SLBM remains the preeminent means by which a nation maintains a second strike. Few nations bother with land-based ballistic missiles, but many more invest in the far higher cost of submarine-based, and for good reason. A single Ohio-class submarine can launch hundreds of warheads if unencumbered by political restrictions. One submarine can effectively turn a giant first-world nation into a third-world hellscape of competing fiefdoms scrambling for clean water and food in about 15 minutes, and never mind the direct effects. But is that necessary for deterrence? Arguably no. Since the concept of triad was created to justify manned bombers in an era of intercontinental ballistic missiles, highly accurate cruise missiles were introduced, which gave another means of delivering nuclear weapons as well as conventional munitions. A disadvantage is that they are easier, though far from easy, to intercept. An advantage is they can be launched in such a manner as to render them undetectable by standard space-based monitors and fly so low as to make the early warning radars ineffective. In many ways, the nuclear-armed cruise missile is more destabilizing than ICBMs or SLBMs. Recognizing this, nations such as Israel have put nuclear-armed cruise missiles on far smaller attack submarines and use those as the basis of their second strike capability. So effective are these cruise missiles that several Ohio-class submarines were converted to carry 150 of them instead of the standard ballistic missiles. Considering each one can carry a nuclear warhead, that retains quite a capability. And that can be a mix of nuclear and non-nuclear warheads, making them a legitimate tactical and operational asset as well as strategic. The cruise missile capability of the Ohios is being replaced by the Virginia class, which can launch up to 40 missiles of various types. While not nearly as much as an Ohio, 24 or more nuclear cruise missiles represents a significant capability. All of this to say that in the absence of the Columbia class, we would still retain a legitimate, robust, and redundant sea-based second strike capability utilizing the Virginia class. So should we abandon the Columbia class? Maybe. But no matter what, we need to relearn how to make SSBNs, even if that means we go to a far smaller fleet augmented by the Virginia class. The world in technology has changed since the Ohio class dominated the depths, and replacing them one for one is foolishness. Our strategic thinking should probably adjust as well.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.